All right, well, I want to welcome you guys to Pastor's Point of View. Today is March the 28th, 2018. This is Holy Week. Did you know that?
Yes.
And so we have Good Friday coming up, and of course, Resurrection Sunday. So that's why we decided to do this on Wednesday, even though there are people out there that believe the crucifixion happened on Wednesday. So we might be interfering with their Good Wednesday. That's supposed to be a joke, but
Well, it wouldn't be very good anyway, right?
Right.
It's storm clouds and
yeah, the crucifixion of Christ.
veil was parted or torn apart.
Yes, it was. But I'm here. You notice that Brother Jim is not with me today. We gave him the day off, and I'm here with my good friend Tomalea Bench, who is a Sugarland Bible Church member, and she loves the field of politics and tries to keep us all up to speed on what's going on in the political arena. And one of the things she does that I really appreciate is she keeps us up to speed on local politics, because a lot of people really aren't paying attention to city council and those kind of things. And so some pernicious things slip in because people don't pay attention to local races. So appreciate her ministry. My name is Dr. Andy Woods. I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. And the reason Tomalea is with us is we're going to be talking about a political issue today. So the political issue that we're dealing with is the Consolidation Appropriations Act of 2018. Another way of saying it is the Omnibus legislation that just passed from a Republican Congress and a Republican president. And this is sort of a watchman on the wall type of thing that we're doing. In fact, we've titled this Prophecy Update, What's in the Omnibus Bill? And I think this has prophetic implications, and I'll explain why in just a second. Now, let me just warn you before we get started here, there's a lot of people out there that look at Donald Trump as a political messiah. There's a lot of people within the evangelical Christian church that look at Donald Trump as a political messiah. In fact, I've had people come up to me and open their Bibles to Isaiah 45, which is a prophecy about Cyrus, who led Israel out of bondage. And they say 45 is here because this represents Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is the 45th president of the United States. So there's a lot of people out there that when you criticize Donald Trump in any way, you're going against their Messiah. And so you get a vituperative reaction from people. And I'm here to warn you today, folks, that if that's your mentality, you might not want to watch this broadcast, because I don't consider myself a never Trumper. You know, I mean, I personally voted for Trump in the last election cycle. And we've actually done programs promoting some of the stuff Donald Trump has done. For example, when he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, we did a program, praising him for that. When he took us out of the Paris Climate Accord, we did a program praising for that. So I'm not just a Trump negative person by any stretch of the imagination, but I think that what Trump has done here with this omnibus bill is reprehensible. And, all these people ran on a particular set of promises. In November of 2016, they all told us they were going to drain the swamp. And, they weren't going to do business as usual. And here we are with this omnibus bill that just passed, I think, on Friday. Mm-hmm. And I think what they did here is worse than anything Obama probably could have ever come up with. So that's the direction we're headed in today, folks. And I want to make you aware of this omnibus bill that's now a law. I want to make you aware of what's wrong with it. I want to deflate the excuses people are using to justify it. And I want to make us all watchmen on the wall And I want to make us all people that hold everybody accountable for their unconstitutional behavior, even if it's the Republicans leading the charge. So what do you think about all that, Tomalea? Do you have any opening thoughts on that?
Well, I guess my opening thought would be that when you go into First and Second Kings and First and Second Chronicles, many times a king is described, and it will indicate the things he did right.
Mm-hmm.
It'll indicate the things he did wrong. And so, as someone who reads, I see that, and it tells me that it is okay and correct to recognize when someone did something right, but not to overlook when they did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be my petition to people, is to be willing to call out when they do something wrong.
Yeah. That's a great example, because that's exactly what God does, as you pointed out in the book of First and Second Kings, in particular. And there's a mentality out there where Christians, I think, are censoring each other. We talk about censorship from the left all the time, but try to say something outside of the script, the Messiah script of Trump, and what you find yourself being censored by is the Republican Party, Christians, and conservatives. And if we're going to censor each other, then we can't hold anybody accountable for their behavior. And I think we're called to hold everybody accountable, aren't we?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that our obligation as Christians? Isn't that our obligation as members of this free society to do that? And when we censor each other, we're not able to do that. So anyway, why don't we just start off with this quote by Carroll Quigley. Carroll Quigley was a longtime professor, I think, of political science at Georgetown University. And Carroll Quigley, of course, was Bill Clinton's mentor. And he makes a very interesting statement in his book. I think it's called Tragedy and Hope, pages 147 to 48. You want to read that for us, or to us?
Yes, and it looks like this was back in 1966.
Mm-hmm. So this has been the blueprint for a long time.
That's in our lifespan.
Yeah.
The chief problem of American political life for a long time has been how to make the two congressional parties more national and international. The argument that the two parties should represent opposed ideals and policies, one perhaps of the right and the other of the left, is a foolish idea, acceptable only to doctrinaire and academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can, quote, throw the rascals out, unquote,
Mm-hmm.
at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy.
Mm-hmm. So what they're saying is, if we're going to take America down, we've got to have globalists in both parties. Because that way, if people get upset and throw their bums out, and I've seen that happen many times in my lifetime, as the Congress was in my lifetime, not in my complete lifetime, but as a young man, I remember that one party ruled over Congress for about 4 decades, and that shifted, I think, with the Gingrich Revolution. And the Democrats got control again, and there's been about 2 or 3 upheavals in my lifetime that I can remember where we've shifted it and put it back in Republican hands. And what Quigley is saying is, look, we got to have globalists in both parties and one-worlders in both parties, because if the voters ever get the urge to throw the bums out, nothing will change.
And I think he's also here hinting at a deception, because he's saying, so that the American people can, quote, throw the rascals out. So he's indicating, in my estimation, that it's a known amongst the elitists that there's no difference between the parties, but that the average American voter thinks that they do have 2 opposing parties with 2 opposing ideals and policies.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's why they have a Messiah complex for one of the parties. And if you criticize that party, you get censored by your own people. And I think this whole angle that we're coming from came out very, very clearly in the Omnibus legislation that just got passed, I think, on Friday. And I think this is the reason why America is not mentioned in Bible prophecy. You look at all the players in the end times, Ezekiel 38 and 39, you don't have America mentioned at all. And could this be one of the reasons? You know, we have self-destructed because we've gone against what our founding fathers envisioned. And you were going to say something?
Oh, no. You said omnibus, and I didn't know if you wanted to take the opportunity to define that for our viewers.
Why don't we go ahead and do that?
An omnibus bill is a proposed law that covers a number of diverse or unrelated topics. Omnibus is derived from Latin and means for everything. Mm-hmm. An omnibus bill is a single document that is accepted in a single vote by a legislature, but packages together several measures into one or combines diverse subjects.
So that's what we had. We had an abnormal spending spree rammed down our throats on Friday that didn't come in a normal budgetary package. And this was signed, you know, in some of the shadiest of terms, which I'll articulate in just a second. So here's what we want to do. We want to, number one, look at what was bad about this bill that's now law. I want to talk very briefly about the process and then the content.
Okay.
And then we also want to articulate what was good about the bill, because there was actually something good in it. And I think there was a way for the president to have gotten what was good without blindly accepting the bad, which is what he did. And then we'll sort of look at the excuses that were given as to why we needed to do it this way at this time. And then we'll sort of wrap up with some concluding thoughts.
Okay.
So that's sort of the direction that we're headed in. But let's talk about the bill itself. Let's talk about the problem. Let's start with the process. Why was this bill the opposite of what all these guys ran on in 2016? When we voted in a Republican president and when we voted in a Republican House and Senate and re-voted that in, why was it the opposite of what they ran on? Well, first of all, the bill was 2,232 pages. I mean, that's a big chunk of material, isn't it? And they were given, once it was created, 17 hours to read and debate and vote on this. Now, I don't know, can you read that amount of material in 17 hours? There were no opportunities to improve the legislation with amendments. And really, when you look at it, the whole thing came into existence through the help of four people. That would be Pelosi and Schumer on the Democrat side, and then you have Ryan and McConnell on the Republican side. They were in a smoky back room with their staffs, and they were the ones that came up with this monstrosity and rammed the whole thing down our throats. And so this does not represent the draining of the swamp that we wanted. You know, in my opinion, this doesn't even represent representative government. And so that's what we were given. I mean, didn't we get all this stuff under Obama? With Obamacare and all of these things that passed, and we all wanted something different. Well, lo and behold, the Republicans get control and do the exact same thing, if not worse. Please.
Well, isn't it more of a betrayal when that's the behavior that was criticized? Mm-hmm. So when that behavior was occurring between 2009 and 2012, there was a very sharp repudiation of it by the Republican Party. And so when they do the exact thing, to me, that's an even greater betrayal.
Yes. That's how I feel at the present time. And, you know, a lot of people want to get mad at us for bringing this to people's attention. But folks, don't get mad at us. Get mad at the people that just did this to you. So the whole process was wrong. Now, what about the cost? How much did this whole thing cost? And you might want to get Proverbs 22, verse 7 ready to read. It cost $1.3 trillion with a T And if folks would Google online the national debt clock, they will see how horrific our debt situation is, how it keeps going up and up and up and up. And I think we're at the $21 trillion debt mark, national debt. It's an amount of money that you can never pay back. And what we're basically doing is tacking onto that another $1.3 trillion. And here's the thing, these people that voted for this are not going to pay for any of it. The whole tab is passed on to our children and our grandchildren. So, I have an almost 12-year-old at home, and we just put onto her shoulders a massive amount of debt. It's things that she's going to have to pay back after we're all dead and gone. And so, if you have compassion on anybody in this, I hope it's not Donald Trump. I hope it's your children and your grandchildren. And, the Bible is pretty clear about the subject of debt, what it does. There are many, many verses we could quote, but one of my favorites is Proverbs 22 and verse 7. Do you have that?
Yes. The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is the slave of the lender.
So once you go under debt, you become a slave. You become an economic slave. And since we're $21 trillion in debt, our nation is in a slave state. I wish people would quit talking about how America is the richest country in the world. Debt is artificial prosperity. It allows you to spend money you don't have. It gives you the illusion that you're rich when you're not. And we're $21 trillion in debt, according to the national debt clock that people can see in Times Square in New York City, how it keeps running. And here comes Trump and the Republicans that just added $1.3 trillion to an already monumental debt. So the process is corrupt. The cost of this thing is totally outrageous. In fact, I've listened to some commentators that said this is the biggest spending piece of legislation we've ever had in the history of the United States. It might even be bigger than some of the things that we got under the prior administration.
Yes. Unfortunately, I guess I'm at the age where numbers are starting to escape my memory. But sometimes you're just hit with the principle of it. And you just say, that's a really big number.
Yeah.
And I can't even wrap my head around it. I remember that some of the sermon series that you gave to encourage us, you were looking at debt, and you had pictures where you started out with a person, and then you moved up, and you just got to these places where you had like a destroyer ship, and here was the little bitty person, and this represented the debt. And sometimes that's the only way to get your mind around that number is to signify it.
Yeah, conceptualize it.
Yeah.
I think it was Tip O'Neill who said a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money. The former Speaker of the House in the 80s. And that's why I put those pictures up in that series. People can get that series if they want it on our website. It's called The Bible and Voting at the Sugarland Bible Church website. But yeah, here's some pictures where you stack up $100. Here's what it looks like next to a football field, a soccer field, a 747 airline. Here's what it looks like next to the former Twin Towers. Here's what it looks like next to the Empire State Building. And it's just a monumental, monstrous number. And all these people that told us they were going to shrink the government and fix the debt not only have they not done that, they've compounded the problem, many, many times over. So the process is corrupt. The cost is outrageous. Let's look at the content. Let's look at the negative content first. How much of this money is going to be spent towards building the wall around America that Donald Trump promised he would do over and over again in his campaign? I think it's a paltry $640 million, which is microscopic compared to the total sum. What about the border? How much of the money is spent enforcing the border? Well, again, a microscopic sum. And beyond that, this piece of legislation handcuffs the ICE people, ICE, who are
Mm-hmm.
responsible for immigration enforcement. It handcuffs how many agents they can hire. And catch this, it caps the number of illegals that ICE folks can detain. So it does the opposite of what we all voted for, which was border enforcement. And beyond that, it prohibits any of this money under the border section to be spent on the wall, unless it meets, very narrow constraints. And beyond that, it sends money to a bunch of other countries for their immigration enforcement. Isn't that amazing? It sends money to Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Tunisia, Afghanistan, Vietnam, and China. And when you look at how that money is to be spent by these other countries, we're going to give them money for their borders, but we're not going to enforce our own borders.
I thought China already had a wall.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting? Well, their wall is to keep people in. Our wall is to keep people out. And whenever people complain about the United States, that's a little fact, I like to bring up. I mean, the money goes for other reasons in these international countries, other countries as well, but part of it is border enforcement for them. What does it do with sanctuary cities? Can you tell our listeners what a sanctuary city is? Some people might not even know.
Oh, that is a city that has determined that it will not assist with ICE and the detention of illegals that are in our country. I try not to say illegal immigrant. I think it's illegal alien. So as a sanctuary city, you have basically given the green light for someone to come there illegally. That's not the same meaning as a sanctuary city in the Bible.
Yep. Isn't that interesting how they take spiritual concepts and put a new twist on it?
Yeah, because that sanctuary city was innocent until proven guilty.
Yep, yeah. You find those in the book of Numbers and other places. Yeah, there were supposed to be 6 cities set up where you could be, if a homicide occurred, you could flee there until your innocence was established or your guilt was proven one way or the other. It's a very early concept of innocent until proven guilty. But what we're talking about here is cities. I think San Francisco is a sanctuary city, isn't it?
I think Houston is as well.
Yeah. And it's a place where you can go as an illegal and flee and be protected from being deported. And so sanctuary cities go directly against federal law. Now, my hometown, little tiny Los Alamitos, California, in Southern California, in Orange County, the city council, and I'm so proud that they did this, they said enough is enough. There was a law passed in California which prohibited localities from cooperating with the feds in this area of illegal detention and deportation. And they said, we're not going to follow California law. We're going to follow federal law. Why is that? Because we take an oath in this little city council to uphold the Constitution. So there's some rebellion going on against these sanctuary cities. But the reality of the situation is this Trump omnibus legislation fully funds these sanctuary cities. By the way, this omnibus legislation given to us by the Republicans, the Republican Congress and President, chips away at the Second Amendment. It includes the fix-nix system. What is that? What is the fix-nix system?
Well, I don't remember what the acronym NICS stands for, but it is a database that's used by law enforcement and nowadays for background checks on someone to ensure that you are not ineligible to purchase a firearm. So our law enforcement use it anytime they're dealing with someone that they need to find out if there's perhaps a warrant out for them. So the database was originally just to identify known criminal element, but it's also then being utilized for the background check to see if your name pops up in there, that then you wouldn't be eligible to purchase or own a firearm.
So this fixed NICS system is included in this omnibus legislation, which creates a pathway to allowing unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats to seize weapons from people that have a right to keep and bear arms. And they can do this without due process. And they can do this to a lot of people, including vets. Now, does your average American know that this was part of the legislation that was passed by our so-called conservative and Republican Congress and President? I don't know how many people are aware of that. The legislation, now didn't everybody run in November of 2016 against Obamacare? We're going to dismantle Obamacare. Well, this legislation gives no relief for Obamacare, keeps the whole thing intact. And this legislation is a boondoggle, a spending spree for Planned Parenthood. So what is Planned Parenthood? Do you know what that is? The average person, I mean, that sounds like such an innocuous, innocent-sounding name.
This
Planned
is
Parenthood.
Orwellian.
Who can be against that?
Orwellian makes it sound as if you are planning becoming a parent. But what they actually, I think, are engaging in is how to respond to unplanned parenthood. And so I consider them an agent of genocide. I believe that their founder, Margaret Sanger, was very much a racist, a eugenicist. And so her goal was to accomplish the suppression of the growth of a certain ethnicity in our nation as a race. And so...
And isn't it a historical fact that she actually gave speeches in front of full-orbed KKK members at KKK meetings?
Oh, yeah.
This is the founder of Planned Parenthood.
Yes, and they, ironically, are always located in areas where there's a certain ethnicity. So you think about where you're going to place a business, and so you want to place it close to the customer base.
So let's just be absolutely open about this. Planned Parenthood was founded to eradicate the black race in the United States. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And Planned Parenthood, see, it's one thing, folks, to have abortion on demand in America. Roe versus Wade gave us that. It knocked down any state, with very little exceptions, any state law inhibiting abortions, which took the issue away from the state governments and put it in the hands of an omniscient, and I use that word very loosely, obviously, very sarcastically, an omniscient Supreme Court, federalized the issue. So not only is abortion legal in the United States of America, but Planned Parenthood comes along and says, we're going to pay for the abortion. So your taxpayer money from your Christian home and your biblical convictions is coerced against your will, and it goes to Planned Parenthood, and this baby-killing operation now operates around the clock from a racist founder. Now, isn't the Republican Party supposed to be pro-life? I mean, don't they have a pro-life plank in the party platform? So you would think if a Republican House and Congress and Senate signed into a law by a Republican president, if this all came to us through Republicans' hands, you think there would be some kind of limitation on Planned Parenthood. What does this omnibus legislation do? It fully funds grants going to Planned Parenthood. And people are saying, well, why are you so upset about this? I'm upset about this because I can read the details. And people want to get mad at me because, I'm coming down on Trump. Well, don't get mad at me. Get mad at Trump. He's the one with the Congress that created this whole thing. The omnibus legislation also increases every single bureaucracy's budget by 10 to 14%. Even left-wing organizations got a 10 to 14% increase. Now, when I was growing up as a Republican, I was told that the Republican Party wanted to shrink the size and scope of the government. Well, this isn't shrinking anything. It's expanding government radically. And if all this weren't enough, you know what all these congresspersons did? They gave themselves a pay raise in the process. That's part of the omnibus legislation. And I don't mind saying this at all. Any Republican that voted in favor of this legislation is not a conservative, is not a constitutionalist, and is not operating by the principles of our founding fathers. They're not operating by the principles of limited government. They're not even operating by the principles of their own party. And they're certainly not operating in any sense by the divine principles that God has given us in Scripture. Is that too strong? Is that too strong a statement?
No, I think we're at the point of orthopraxy. You study for orthodoxy, and then you go to orthopraxy. And so the Republicans have been given the majority. Where's the orthopraxy?
Yeah.
Do you want to explain to the audience what orthopraxy is?
Yeah, well, it's good. No, I'm glad you brought that up because it shows me you're listening in church, which is always a good thing, right?
Yes.
Ortho, it basically means correct. I think it's a Greek term, if I'm not mistaken, as in you went to the orthodontist and had your mouth corrected. Orthodoxy is a correct belief. And the goal of Bible study is not just a correct belief, it's orthopraxy. Orthodoxy should lead to correct practice or behavior. And so the goal of biblical instruction is both. That's why Paul, when he writes to Timothy, I believe it's in 2 Timothy 1, verse 5, if memory serves, he says the goal of our instruction is love. So the goal of our instruction is not just having a correct set of doctrines. That's only step one. It's to be followed by step two, which is implementation. So, you can say all the right things on a party platform and say all the right things in a speech, but this is a breakdown of orthopraxy.
This is where the rubber meets the road, as my mom says.
And the way you evaluate politicians is you don't listen to what they say. You watch what they do. And what just happened here with this omnibus legislation is a massive betrayal of conservative principles. And, what if Obama had done this in the prior administration? Our side would be screaming at the top of their lungs. And yet, because this time there's an R in front of the name, everything's okay. And I'm not necessarily promoting this. I'm not talking about who should have won in 2016. I'm not talking about what people should do in the next election cycle. I want to just focus only on this omnibus legislation. But there's a consequence to what just happened. They took the base, the people like ourselves that are energetic and lick the stamps to send out the mailers and knock on the doors. They
knock on the doors and hang them on the doorknob.
They just took the base and they just dispirited it. They took the life right out of it. And if you dispirit the base like they just did, because the base is going to say, what's the difference? I go to all this trouble to get the right people elected, and the people I elected are worse than the people that just got thrown out. And if you dispirit the base like what just happened, there are consequences to that. I'm not saying people should go out and do this. I'm saying this is the logical consequence, is people are not going to support the party. And what I foresee happening, I don't like this happening, and I don't think the result will be good. But what I foresee happening is massive, massive, massive losses for the Republican Party in the midterm elections. And if the House and Senate shift to Democratic control, we know what the liberals want to do with Donald Trump. They want to impeach him. And this makes in fact, before Donald Trump even took office, there were books written about impeaching the president by legal scholars. This makes their agenda easier when it falls into opposition control. And so I'm just really discouraged by this piece of legislation. Now, there was something positive that came out of it, but before we do that, why don't you go ahead and
I'll bring it up later then. So the positives.
Well, the positive to the whole thing, I gave you a bunch of negatives, but the positive to the whole thing is it actually rebuilds the military that had been virtually hollowed out by Obama. And it does things like it gives the first pay raise in a whole decade to our men and women in service and in uniform and in our military. So in that sense, it's a positive. And people say, well, how come you're against all this other spending, but you're in favor of military spending? Well, the answer to that is military spending is one of the enumerated powers of the federal government. All these other forms of spending, Planned Parenthood, Obamacare, all of these other different things that we articulated, all of these bureaucracies, there's not a shred of constitutional support for any of that. But there is support for the idea that our government is supposed to provide and fund the military.
Right.
So because that got tacked in there, that's the one positive or the silver lining in the whole thing. So what do you think about all that so far?
I think it's unfortunate that we get one campaign promise fulfilled, and I just kind of wonder if that means that they're just going to give us one per year. Well, then that would mean that we only get 4 during the term of this president and 2 during the term of this Congress. And to me, that's just crumbs. I think they're giving us a false dilemma that they have created because they've intentionally made this an omnibus. They didn't have to place all of these different things into one bill. They could have had separate budget bills, and so it's a game in order to advance what Mr. Quigley was talking about, in order to keep us in a constant uproar as voters. So I'm very disappointed that they keep trying to place us into no-win situations. I'll stop there. I think otherwise I just kind of circle around and repeat myself.
Yeah, no, I think those are all great insights. I mean, it is disheartening to get so little, but we did get at least one thing. And I know people have some comments and questions about this, so we're going to get to those in due course. Put them in the comment box on Facebook, and we'll try to get to your comments and questions. In fact, we will be getting to those a little bit. But I want to move away from the problems to the excuses, because there are an awful lot of people out there that are trying to put a happy face on this. I call it putting lipstick on a pig. I know this because I posted some things about this on my personal Facebook page, and people kind of told me I was overreacting. They kind of break out into these sort of sanctimonious spiritual lectures. I'm not trusting the Lord. I'm not acting like a true pastor. Don't you support our president? Here's one comment that came in today. One person says, relax. God is the one who raises up leaders and puts them in place. Don't you trust him? How easily we forget what would be happening right now if we had the other option leading us. Be patient and watch for things to unfold. So immediately, if you criticize what just happened, you're not exercising patience in their minds. You're not trusting the Lord. and you're really not letting God's blueprint for history work its way out. I mean, were these people so lax in understanding when Obama was doing this stuff? No, they weren't.
Well,
But somehow, because it's our guy doing it, it makes it okay. Go ahead.
I was just curious why they want to live under a Republican form of government. If they want to entrust everything to a leader or a small group of leaders, there are a lot of other places in the world that you can live. But we are a Republican form of government with representative, okay?
And when you say Republican, you're not talking about party.
No.
You're talking about form of government.
I am talking about form of government. And so to place your trust into a leader and give them that much power, there are other forms of government where I think that they would fit in very nicely. But this is not that form of government. This form requires the citizens to be engaged. And you are, I got this book right here, The Political Imperative.
Yeah, why don't you hold that up? I'll hold it up so people
I was going to read from it.
Good.
But The Political Imperative is written by someone who was locally here in Fort Bend County, Sugar Land, had been a chairman of a political party for a while, and he was very engaged. And he is talking about political activity for Christians. And so the actual titles here are The Biblical Role of Christians in Public Policy, Civil Government, and the Political Process. And so he's outlining all this, and he has cautions and encouragements. And one of these is, I think, very fitting for this week, because he's looking at the conversation between Pilate and Jesus. And in John 19, and he says, Pilate therefore said to him, "You do not speak to me. Do you not know that I have authority to release you and I have authority to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin." And so he starts going into this about, who and what's the greater sin. And he kind of comes to the conclusion here that for we as citizens, we're going to be held responsible.
Under God.
We are going to be held responsible for the actions of our elected representatives, especially when they do these things and we don't take action against them for it.
So what you're saying is, based on the form of government that we have a responsibility to constitutionally scrutinize everybody, even people that have done good things in the past, and even people that are part of our own clique, or our own group, or our own party, even people with an R in front of their name. And if we say, well, I trust the person that's there because, after all, Isaiah 45 says they're Cyrus, and I'm going to just give them a free pass. And I like what they did over the past 6 months. I'm abdicating my role as a Christian. I'm abdicating my role as a member of this republic. That's basically what you're saying, right? So what we're doing here as watchdogs is basically what our obligations are under the United States system. So, having said all that, what are the three, and they're basically three arguments that are used over and over and over again to justify what just happened with this Omnibus Bill. And I just want to say this: I've never seen the spin so bad. Not coming from the left, we know that they can spin. I'm talking about mainstream conservative outlets are spinning this thing, trying to make it sound like it's not that bad, like I've never seen before. Let me go ahead and name some names. Dick Morris is spinning this as a positive thing. How about this name here? Jerome Corsi. These are all people that I've liked, I still like to some extent, and follow. They're spinning this as a positive thing. So what they're all telling us is, you don't understand what's happening. This is actually good. So I tried to read all of the comments and make note of the three excuses. So here they are. Number one, Trump, after all, did say he would never do this again when he signed the bill, I think on Friday. And he felt bad about it. Well, to me, to my mind, that's not much of an excuse. And the reason that's not much of an excuse is because he told us that during the campaign. He would never do this. So then he signs the bill, says he'd never do it again. Well, what happened to the promise he made in November of 2016? That promise just disappeared. And if I can't trust the man on his promises that have already been broken, how can I trust the promise that he just made to me on Friday that he'd never do this again?
So what he told us was that he was going to hold his nose while he was signing that bill. And I've heard that phrase used a lot, that people talk about, they're going to hold their nose and vote. And I thought that was what led to the rise of Mr. Trump as a candidate, was because the American people said, we are tired of holding our nose and voting. Because the two parties are not giving us any options here.
And so what you're saying is he's doing that same thing now, holding his nose and voting.
Yeah, same old.
Same old, same old. So anyway, that's excuse number one. Here's excuse number two, and I'm sure people that have chimed in on this on my Facebook page have already written this somewhere, but people say, well, he had no choice. He had no choice in the matter. Why? Because he needed the defense spending. Well, the fact of the matter is everybody has a choice in all kinds of things. I mean, I don't know of hardly any situations we're in where we have no choice. And here was his choice. He could have vetoed the legislation. And you say, well, oh my goodness, if he had vetoed the legislation, then he wouldn't have got the spending for the military. And we would be in a lot of trouble militarily. Well, here's the reality of the situation, folks. There's a playbook for this. It's called Ronald Reagan, probably the last conservative that we had in office back in the 1980s. And Reagan vetoed legislation like this and shut the government down 6 times. And this was at a time when his own party was not in control of the House.
Well, and if you don't like the Republicans, Bill Clinton shut down, right? Yeah.
So he did it to some extent. And this was at a time when opposition control, Reagan was dealing with that issue of opposition control. Trump is not. He's got his own party in the House and the Senate. And this was at a time when communism was expanding radically and dramatically all over the world. And what happened? Reagan still got his defense increases. He won the Cold War. And in 1984, he won a landslide victory, not just in terms of the electoral vote, but also in terms of the popular vote. And it's sort of like shutting down the government is sort of it's like going to have surgery done. There's some short-term pain involved with it, but the long-term consequences are there. And the playbook is all there. Trump, this isn't distant history. This is recent history. He had other options on the table besides simply signing this monstrosity into law. I mean, I think if he had stood his ground, he would have emerged politically stronger. The base would have been behind him. He could have gotten rid of all of these ridiculous domestic things, and he would have gotten his defense spending. And the thing that bothers me about this argument that the president had no choice because he had to do this for defense is what kind of precedent does this set? Because the next time the opportunity to do this arises, people will say it's for defense, it's for defense, and it's for defense. And they'll sign the giant boondoggle legislation again. So, we don't have an effective precedent in line anymore because all people will argue for is this is necessary for defense. So, this argument that the president had no choice in the matter, I don't really agree with that. What do you think about that?
I think that if they did let the government shut down, it would let out the dirty little secret that most Americans are not impacted negatively when it happens.
Now, that's an interesting point because when the government shuts down, the essential functions of government continue.
Yeah.
Now, that would include the military, wouldn't it?
Now, I've been told somehow the military is actually harmed, but I don't know the particulars.
Okay.
And I know that there are an awful lot of those positions that they are paid retroactively.
Okay.
So after the pipeline gets reopened and the federal spending resumes, anything that they missed during the shutdown is retroactively. It's just how much are people unable to go without that payment?
Yeah.
So, and that unfortunately is the blackmail against us.
Yeah.
That's effective.
Yeah.
Just like this, that the one benefit was that it rebuilt the military.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the only thing.
Mm-hmm. But apparently it can be done because Reagan did it.
Yes.
And he came out victorious. In other words, this idea that Trump had no option, frankly, I don't believe that's true. So excuse number one, he'll never do it again. We've deflated that. Excuse number two, he had no choice. We've deflated that. And then there's just one more excuse I hear over and over and over and over and over again from people. And I'm hearing this from what I would call the conservative media spinning things. And they basically say Trump thinks in four-dimensional. He's so smart. He's way ahead of everybody. You just have to trust him. And he outsmarted them all because, after all, this is not a budget. It's an omnibus bill, which gives to the president discretionary abilities concerning how the money is spent. Mm-hmm. So in other words, he gets this big slush fund of money, and there's not a lot allocated for the wall, but he can allocate it for the wall under this omnibus idea. And here's my response to that. First of all, that's not how our republic is supposed to work. Congress is supposed to have the purse strings. And if the Congress can send this big slate of money over to the president, and the president can spend it any way he wants to, how can you hold the Congress accountable for how it spends your money? You don't even know how the money's going to be spent. Mm-hmm. So this argument is taking representative government and it's flipping it on its head. And beyond that, this particular argument is revealing or bringing to fruition what our founding fathers were afraid of, which is a massive, all-powerful executive branch of government. Our founding fathers didn't want that. They were afraid of the executive branch of government. That's why they put limits on it. They never intended for it to have this giant slush fund of money, the executive branch, that it could spend any way it wanted. And in order for us to come out ahead on this, we have to have total trust in the character of the person that occupies the Oval Office. Now, a lot of people have that with Trump. They look at him as a messiah. But here's my question for you. One of these days, if the Lord tarries, you're going to get a liberal Democrat back in the White House. In fact, Trump didn't even win the popular vote, as we all know, the last time around. I mean, our chances of getting a liberal Democrat back in office are very alive, and they're very real. And the precedent that you're sending this giant slush fund of money to the executive branch, and he can spend it any way he wants, are you going to be singing the same tune when Barack Obama version 2, or God forbid Hillary Clinton gets into the White House? And you're not going to be able to cry foul anymore because you let it all go under Trump. And the reality of the situation, folks, if we don't start critiquing the unconstitutional activity of our elected representatives here and now, and we lose the ability to do that because we're too busy censoring each other, then I think we're pretty much finished as a free country. So I think all three of these excuses that have been given about this omnibus bill, I'll never do it again. The president had no choice. The president actually outsmarted everybody because this was an omnibus bill and he could spend the money any way he wants. I think all three of those arguments at the end of the day, are losing arguments. I think what he should have done is he should have used the option the Constitution gives him, which is to veto the legislation. And this whole thing could have been avoided. He would have gone through some momentary discomforts of government shutdown or government shutdowns, but just like Reagan, in the end, if he had taken his case to the American people, he could have gotten rid of all this domestic spending, and he would have gotten his military spending, and we would all be happier. So anyway, that's sort of my take on it.
Sometimes for me, it's more helpful to ask a question right back of a point. And so when you're talking about the slush fund, that is the effective means or the effective outcome of this Omnibus Bill, as a believer, and I'm mandated to live righteously.
Mm-hmm.
Is God pleased by that? Is God pleased when we are circumventing our own rule of law, when we are using deception? Because to me, that's what that is. Mm-hmm. To say, okay, the House, which is the closest to the people,
yes,
is the one that has the ability to raise taxes and therefore has the ability to fabricate or originate the spending.
Mm-hmm. Which is what the Constitution says.
And yet they're abdicating that role, making themselves unnecessary, and sending it over to the president. And I, as a Christian, am to defend that? Is that what I'm being asked to do? And I can't defend that.
I can't either.
I'm living in the age of grace. I am supposed to be living righteously because of the free gift that has been given to me by God. And so I find it very difficult to defend that as a Christian.
Right. Well, you see, this whole thing is designed to remove accountability. Because if the voters don't like what Congress has done with the money, what they can say is, well, we just gave the president a slush fund. We had no control over how he spent it. And if the voters don't like what the president did, he could say, well, the Congress is the constitutional vehicle to give me this money, and I'm just following what the Congress said. So at the end of the day, you can't hold the president responsible, and you can't hold the Congress responsible. And there's a reason why our founding fathers, as you rightly articulated, said that the purse strings don't belong with the president. The purse strings belong with the Congress.
And the House, because the House is even closer to the people than the Senate. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, it's excellent. And so, I think what we're watching here is a breakdown of the separation of powers and a breakdown of accountability and an inability to hold people accountable for their actions. And, folks that are conservative, Christian, Republican oriented may like this scenario when it's one of their guys in the Oval Office, but that they're going to rue the day, because that could change in the next election cycle. You could get a very liberal Democrat in there doing the same thing, and you're removing from yourself the ability to cry foul in that future day because you let it go now.
And, as someone who has been very actively engaged, you have discussions with people. I can tell you that I'm going to be taken to task if I continue to support the Republican Party because of my strong advocacy against abortion. That hypocrisy is going to be thrown right back at me. And so I'm disappointed, but I'm also resentful that here I am, a person who has been providing support, and the party is doing this to me. They're placing me in a position that I have to try to explain why I would continue to support them.
Mm-hmm.
And now my witness as a person of integrity,
Mm-hmm.
a woman of God, is on the line if I continue to give that support because of that hypocrisy right there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're not talking about the spending for the National Endowment for Arts. We're talking about abortion,
Mm-hmm.
abortion on demand, murder.
Mm-hmm. So basically, someone can come up to you and say, I know you're a Christian. I know that you're pro-life. I know that you're very active in your party. And yet you're actively supporting a party that just increased the budget of Planned Parenthood. And that destroys your ability to be a God-ordained witness in this world.
Yeah, and I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing.
That's what your very calling is.
Did we already say this? That
It's
you
worth
talk
saying again.
you talk about why is a business in business, and so the number one question you ask them is,
why do you exist?
Why do you exist? And so, why did God have me born during the church age?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so that during this time of grace, I can be witnessing to others about that free gift. That's why I'm here now instead of 2,000 years ago.
Yeah. And so this political compromise inhibits your ability to do that. That's what you're getting at. Yeah. All good points, folks. Let's get to a few comments and questions. One person writes in and says, sometimes it goes further than censoring and looks more like bullying to me. And I think she's talking about there the self-censorship that we do to each other. And I remember, you probably don't remember this, on your personal Facebook page, you had voiced some reservations about Trump during the election. And somebody wrote on there, you probably don't remember this, people that won't vote for Trump in the election are dangerous people and they need to be watched and monitored. Do you remember that?
There's so many times it's like water off of a duck's back. Yeah. I just, whatever.
That's not even a reasonable conversation. That's bullying.
Well, the representative in Virginia last week, or maybe 2 weeks ago at this point, he really brought this to the forefront of how there's no longer the ability to have reasoned discussion back and forth of opposing viewpoints because people are just lobbing, these insults at each other in such a way that it just shuts it down.
Well, I had one person on Facebook just yesterday evening, because I took the viewpoint that we're taking here in this video, challenge my whole ministry. Called my whole ministry as a pastor into question.
Your salvation?
Well, they didn't call my salvation into question, but my ministry. I'm not acting like a pastor. Because a pastor is supposed to be a mouthpiece for Trump, because Trump's the vessel. Well, we've just censored ourselves from constitutionally scrutinizing Trump and what he just did, as well as the other co-conspirators. One person writes in and says, this might be our demise, this or the rapture. And that's why we entitled this a prophecy update. Because this kind of thing that we're seeing might be the reason why America is not mentioned in prophecy. We've debilitated ourselves through our two-party system. Another person says vote them out of office in the next election cycle, and I agree. The problem is we have a mindset that we're going to replace one party with the other, and the Carol Quigley quote demonstrates that we've got problem people in both parties. It's a lot more complex, isn't it, than just R&D. You got to vote for the right person.
Well, it's almost like there's a spiritual battle there somewhere that someone knows about.
There we go. Another person says, I don't hear anyone saying this bill is okay on the Republican side anyway. Well, I disagree with you. I think a lot of people are trying to, I would call them acting as enablers. If you have someone in your family that's an alcoholic, there's a tendency to minimize the behavior and make it look like it's not as bad as it really is, because you don't want to admit you got an alcoholic in the family. That's what's going on with this bill.
Well, and
lipstick on a pig. It's not as bad as you think it is, and so we're acting like enablers, and we're not functioning, as you articulated earlier, as free citizens in a republic who have a responsibility to hold everybody accountable, including Trump and the Republicans.
The Speaker of the House was supportive of this, and he's a Republican.
Yeah, so that would
Paul Ryan, and I believe you could probably go to the webpage of your House Republicans, with the exception of the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
They came out in advance and indicated they would oppose it.
Yeah.
But generally, these votes are there, and you can look them up.
Yep.
And you can see how they voted, yes or no.
And the 4 pieces that I've sort of used to put this together are Mike Lee's Facebook page. And I think we're going to try to put links to those online. Read what he said. He's I think he has a 100% conservative rating. Senator from Utah.
Yes, sir.
Right? 98% conservative rating, which is still pretty good. The best there is. And also look at the Freedom Caucus letter to the president, urging him not to sign this monstrosity. I think we have that link somewhere on Facebook. Also look at the brief piece by Tucker Carlson of Fox News. He does a good 5-minute expose on this, as does Laura Ingraham in the Ingraham Angle. I mean, they just lay out all the facts, basically, that we just went through. The people that, I've found that are excusing this are Dick Morris, Jerome Corsi, and to some extent even Rush Limbaugh. And it's been very disappointing to see people try to put lipstick on a pig. So I don't agree with what this person is saying. I don't hear anyone saying this bill is okay on the Republican side. Another person says draining the swamp, ? Not looking that way at all since the water level has risen. ! Disheartening indeed. Another person says these individuals are not public servants, but are interested in self-gain. Sometimes I wonder if there is a way to suit the senators and congressmen who basically had a verbal contract with their constituents. I think she meant sue them.
Yeah, they probably did an autocorrect.
Yeah. Should we file a breach of contract? That would be an interesting legal question.
Well, supposedly that's what elections are about. But I'm sorry to be sarcastic, but there was, Mr. Barton had a book, and I've got 2 or 3 on my shelf at home. I don't know if you've got one here, but he had cited that there was indeed a Supreme Court decision, I believe it was Supreme Court, not a federal court, that an elected official back in the 80s or 90s did get thrown out for violating campaign promises. Now, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. I mean, there was that decision. Don't you wish we could pull that one out and dust it off and say, okay, here's precedent?
Yep. And I think the ultimate enforcers of this breach of promises is the voters.
Yeah.
We've got to get active. We've got to get involved. We've got to get informed. We've got to get away from loyalty. If you don't hear anything else we've said today, folks, hear this. We've got to get away from loyalty to persons, personalities, and parties, and get back to loyalty to principles. Another person, one of your fans, writes in and says, Tomalea Bench, you go. Tell it like it is, ! And then says, can you give us the name of that book again? So they're talking about the imperative book.
So this is The Political Imperative, and it was written by Norm Mason, and he has a subtitle, An Assignment from God. And I will have to find out how available this still is, because I really can't tell you. This was originally published by Jeb Eyre, with an E on the end, publishing.com. So I don't know if this is still out there in publication. Since he is someone who's local, we could possibly go through some connections that we know in order to contact him. You think it's on Amazon? Okay. Mr. Producer found the link.
Awesome.
I just had to throw in that little Levin thing, you know.
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Producer.
Yeah. She says, hold it up one more time. How about that other book you got there, A Miracle?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you hold that one up real fast? A
Miracle That Changed the World, The 5,000-Year Leap. And what I was going to pull out of this one was that Ben Franklin had said, and it's Ben Franklin. And, you know, we know that he was possibly a carnal Christian. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's kind of where we are.
Now, he said something else, too, that I was going to weave in here, and it relates to your point earlier about our responsibility as citizens to hold our elected officials accountable, regardless of party or personality. And he was coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and this is in the actual notes of the founding father, I want to say Madison, that kept copious notes. And a lady said to him, well, doctor, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? And he said, a republic, if you can keep it. So he put the responsibility back on her in terms of whether we're going to exist as a free people.
Okay.
Another person says, Andy, that being said, God could have put Trump in office to judge America, ? Like he did with Israel when he allowed them to be taken into captivity for their disobedience against God's commands. And I really don't know. That could be true. I don't know for certain if it is. I will say this, that I've tried to be very deferential and optimistic towards Trump. I've tried to applaud him when he's done great things, which he has. But at the same time, I don't look at him as some untouchable Messiah, the way so many Christians seem to do. We need to hold everybody accountable.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Am I responsible to save somebody?
Yes. Well, God ultimately saves.
So what I'm responsible to do
Share.
is to share and speak the truth. Okay.
So that's sort of what we've done here.
Yeah.
Another person says, trusting the Lord never means ignoring the truth or allowing evil to run rampant. Another person says, I've always supported Trump, but I can't make myself feel good about this Omnibus Bill for some reason. And I'm with you on that comment. There have been so many people that have tried to convince me that it's really not as bad as you think it is. And I can't shake the feeling that what just happened was very negative for our country. Another person says, do you think Congress is doing their job? No, I don't. Particularly when you give the government, the executive branch, a slush fund to do what they want with it, because that violates the Constitution, which puts the power of the purse in the hands of the Congress, not the president. Another person says, of course, Trump had options, ! I would love to know exactly why he signed it after threatening the veto. I completely agree. They're making it sound as if Trump had his hands were tied. He had no options, but he had options. If I were to guess as to why he signed it, he was afraid of the government shutdown. He thought that would hurt him politically, when the Reagan model showed us that actually could have helped him politically, and he would have done the right thing in the process. Last person writes in, maybe you know the answer to this, and says, what has Ted Cruz said about the ominous Omnibus Bill? Do you know that answer off the top of your head? I would assume he'd be critical of it.
He opposed it.
He opposed it. Good for him.
Yes. And I've seen a clip of him speaking, so I don't know if it was a clip originally on his webpage, but I've seen short little clips of him criticizing it.
Yeah.
So it could probably easily be found.
And it might be good if you do some research on this and you find your representatives that oppose this to send them an encouraging email. Certainly, they get a lot of negative email, encouraging, saying thank you for standing on principle and opposing this legislation.
Well, and so we were talking about, being engaged. So one of the things that I have found out over the years is that when you phone, sometimes the lines get very busy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's an answering machine that's used to screen out those calls so that you really don't even reach your senator. Not my Senator Cruz, but my other senator.
The one who put the fix Nix stuff into this.
Yeah, he's been screening calls for about 10 years now.
His name starts with a C and ends in Ornan.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So, but my point, I was being sarcastic. My point is there's really not any counting of that. So when you do actually reach somebody and you're speaking to a young person, and you hate to be really hateful to this young person who's working in that office, and they're taking the heat from the angry person rather than the elected official. They don't take your info. Sometimes they'll screen you so much as to find out your zip code. So how do you make sure that it's documented somewhere that you express this opinion? It has to be done in writing. And so I realize that most of this stuff, we hear about it essentially after it has happened or within just hours of it happening. And I would say, really, your opinion isn't going to change their vote. So you're not writing them because you want to change their vote, but I would still express that opinion to them and do so in a respectful manner, but send it to them in writing.
Okay.
And that has to be kept track of. So when they receive those letters from you, now you'll usually get a canned reply. So, but that's one way to be continually reaching out to them and letting them know where you stand on this and why you disagree, with it.
All right. Well, we're gonna.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay. So you were speaking about keeping it local. I had already thrown away the newspaper, but there was an article that came out here about 4 or 5 days ago in my local newspaper, and it was talking about the fact that there's going to be an initiative to try to help some funding for businesses post-Harvey. Well, it was block grants from the federal government. So when you're looking at your local issues that are going on, please keep an eye for the fact that there's this opioid crisis in our nation, and it's called federal block grants. And so this is how they bring your local governments and even your businesses into compliance by placing that money out there for them. But they're going to have to go along with certain things. So by all means, be watching the local and discourage them from these the so-called free money. Because it's not free. There's strings attached.
Always strings attached. All right, folks. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our prophecy update. What's in the Omnibus Bill? ? Looked at some bad things in it, the one good thing in it. Why the excuses that are used today to justify it don't hold water. And we made, some concluding thoughts there. Tomalea gave some great practical insight related to political activism. We do recognize that our FB version of this had a few interruptions in it, but don't panic. We've got the whole thing on another camera, and this is going to be converted to a YouTube video very, very quickly, which we're going to upload on Facebook. Yeah, or I'm sorry, we're going to upload on YouTube, and I think. And I should be able to put a link to it. There we go, in Facebook. Trying to get the technology straight.
Just trust us.
So you're gonna have access to you're gonna have access to an unfiltered, uninterrupted video. So those of you that are frustrated with a few interruptions, don't hit the panic button quite yet. This will be something that you can share with your friends. By the way, speaking of YouTube, I hope you will subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just go to Andy Woods Ministries, or you could also type into the YouTube search engine Andy Woods Pastor's Point of View or Andy Woods Pastor's Perspective. It'll take you right to it, and it'll give you access to all kinds of other videos that we have there. We've got every pastor's point of view we've ever done archived there. And you could also find this at the SLBC Facebook page as well. And since the crucifixion of Christ is going to be celebrated on Friday, our office is going to be closed. But I would encourage you this week to, really focus on the crucifixion of our Lord Jesus Christ. And I hope you worship at your local church on Sunday and celebrate his bodily resurrection from the dead. I had wanted to bring a kind of a teaching on Pastor's Point of View on that subject, but I felt the gravity of this Omnibus Bill sort of eclipsed it. So please celebrate our risen Lord this Sunday. And
Sunday's coming.
Sunday's coming. And so at this time we're going to sign off. We ask that you'll pray for us as we're praying for you. And we'll see you next time.
Which will be the 13th.
Which will be on the 13th
Of
April. So I've got some scheduling interruptions next week, but we'll be back together on the 13th. Is that Friday the 13th? Oh my goodness. Maybe we should not have it on Friday the 13th just to avoid the omen. No, we're going to be here Friday the 13th, and we're going to be bringing you truth from God's Word. So until next time, we will see you, and God bless you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.